what we see as a very good way to resolve farm succession is to get everybody in the room. So you have your accountant, your solicitor, your Teagasc advisor, and all the family in the room. So therefore, if a family member has a question, the expertise is in the room to answer that question.
Over the last few weeks, we've been discussing farm succession and the best approaches to achieving a smooth transition. As outlined previously, there are several key steps that need to be taken, and planning these steps is crucial, not just for the older generation, but for the younger generation coming through. You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We'd really appreciate it if you could listen, follow, and leave us a review on Apple or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. In the last couple of episodes, I've been speaking with James McDonnell, a financial specialist with Teagasc, about farm succession. In this episode, we pick up the conversation as James explains how planning helps farms deal with issues around care of the next generation and the Fair Deal scheme.
The Nursing Home Support Scheme, I think, is the official title of it, but we all know it as the Fair Deal Scheme. So how do you end up having to deal with that? Well, nobody knows what care they'll need in later life. So some people could be, you could say they're lucky enough that they just have a heart attack and pass on. Others,
If you call that luck.
yeah, I know. And others, you could get dementia, and you could be sitting in a nursing home, trapped in a body, for a long number of years before eventually that gets you. And, people sometimes suffer for a long time with cancer, and there's all sorts of diseases out there. And lots of families might not be in the position that they can give their parents, 24-hour care. And if it gets to that, well, probably a nursing home will be part of the conversation. But nursing homes are expensive at, I think, maybe the guts of 1,500 a week. So you wouldn't be long eating into a small farm. If the typical farm in Ireland is 95 acres, I think is a typically sized farm in Ireland. And I'm sure, tillage farmers are probably maybe slightly larger. I'm not sure, but it's still expensive anyway. So the Nursing Home Support Scheme is a scheme that's designed to help people. Now, anybody can apply for it, but the first thing you need to prove is, as part of the application process, is that you have a care need. So if you have a care need, then you can enter the scheme. But then there's a financial aspect to it. So they will take 80% of your income. So if pension is your own income, they'll take 80% of your pension, and that'll go towards paying the nursing home. But that mightn't be enough to cover it. So you can take out a loan to pay the balance. So the government will, or the HSE will pay the nursing home the balance. And that money then the loan is repaid from your assets when you pass away. Okay. Right. So there's a lien put on your assets at 7.5% per year. And you can apply as part of the application process to have that capped at 3 years. So there's a 3-year cap. And so 7.5% by 3 years is 22.5%. So 22.5% of €1,000,000 farm is 220,000. So if the person that receives the farm ends up having to pay that bill, well, sure, they have to take out a fairly substantial loan. They want a good part-time job, or they might have to sell a few sites or a bit of land to pay for it. So, yes. So with the Fair Deal scheme, whatever the nursing home is owed, it gets paid. Now, if that's not the full 22.5%, they'll only take what they're owed. Okay. If it's more, well, the max they'll take is the 22.5%. Now, to avail of the 3-year cap, the farm has to be continued as a farm business. So the parent had a sudden illness and needed care, so the farm is continued in operation, and there's a successor appointed or about to be appointed, or maybe the farm had already been transferred and it's part of the 5-year look back. Well, then there's a successor in place, but you have to apply to have the 3-year cap.
So describe that 5-year look back now.
On the application form, I think you're asked, have you transferred any assets? out of your name in the previous 5 years.
Okay.
So they're valued and they become part of the process. Yeah. So how do you know when you need care is the hard question. Nobody
Sure.
knows. You know,
Yeah.
it's a bit like asking when are you going to die? Sure, I don't ever want to die, but everybody does. So when people hear about the fair deal scheme, think, oh, I need to transfer the farm fairly soon because maybe my health is starting to fail. So that's a stick. So there's lots of carrots. But then we have, as I told you a few weeks ago in this, that I came across a 63-year-old man that had a 92-year-old dad, and he was suddenly in a major hurry to transfer the farm. And I don't know why the hurry was there. I think it might have been around a proposal in the budget that hasn't materialized yet. But yeah,
So in terms of planning then along the way, that if it's a normal part of succession, the farm will be transferred over, and if the parent gets sick, then within after a 5 year period, or year six or year seven after it, the farm obviously doesn't come into that scenario. So it has to become part of that conversation that we talked about over the last few episodes.
yeah, and sometimes you find that there might be an unwritten agreement in the family, and maybe it's in some children's heads. Oh, John got the farm, so he'll have to mind the parents.
Sure.
But that mightn't ever have been said. So all of that needs to be part of the communication that we talked about in our first episode. Maybe John that got the farm, it's a small farm. He's struggling to make an income because of price volatility and high costs. And maybe the farm is more than a full-time job. He's working 65 hours a week. That he doesn't have time to care for his parents. Maybe that's not the way the farm is laid up or laid out. Parental care, should it be required, needs to be part of the communication or the conversation that happens within the family.
So, and it's all a part of it. And as we keep saying, that can't happen early enough in most families. And just talking about early and the younger side of the house, we talked a lot about the older side of the house. Let's go back to the younger side of the house a little bit in terms of the education, what, a vital part that education plays, I suppose, not only in education for itself in terms of knowing how to do it better, but in the other side of it as well, James, in terms of some of the tax rules we touched upon in the last few episodes.
For the younger people receiving the farm, with some of the tax conditions, if you claim a relief, there may be active farmer conditions. And, I suppose if you receive a farm, the first thing is it's a business. You need to have the education to run the farm. So a green cert, I think, is always important. So sometimes, when children finish the leaving cert, they're not sure what they want to do. They don't want to go straight to college. It's often a wise thing to go to an ag college for a year. Maybe if that doesn't happen, maybe there are part-time courses that can be done in the lead up to going farming. And I was speaking to some of our education officers recently, and John Kelly, the principal in Ballyhaise, said to me that there's at least one person on every course that has received the farm, has paid the stamp duty because they don't have the education course, but they're now doing a course with a view to claiming it back. So you have 3 years to complete a course if you receive the farm and you don't have your green cert. So, and as we mentioned, 10,000 was our example farm, the stamp duty. And if a course costs you 3 to 5,000, well, sure, it's money well spent in that you can get the stamp duty back. It covers the course, but you also learn so much more to help make the farm more efficient. So that's important. That's as important as anything else. And then in terms of the active farmer conditions, the Green Cert course allows you to comply with the active farmer conditions. So if you have the training and manage the farm to make a profit, um, now you're complying with the active farmer conditions in terms of some of the reliefs that you may have claimed.
So, James, there's, I think the last figure I seen, there's just something like 80% of all young people are going to college in one form or another. So there's a lot of educated people coming out the far side. They have degrees, they have masters, they have PhDs in some regards. So there's a lot of educated people. If somebody comes out with a degree, will they get it, or is there something specific? Is there specific courses only that will allow somebody to be recognized as a young trained farmer?
There's loads of different types of courses, and they're all listed on the stamp duty, Department of Agriculture stamp duty document. And a good education officer is probably the place to go in terms of if you're a barrister or you're an accountant or maybe you're an electrician or a carpenter. So depending on the trade, but the majority of trades and degrees, you just need to do a specific level 6 course
Okay.
to qualify for the minimum stamp duty relief. Some of those courses are done outside of normal hours. Some of them are part-time, some of them are full-time. So I suppose it depends on the commitment, the time commitment that you have. Like if you're finished college and you have a student loan, you want to get into the workplace fairly quickly. So it depends on what your job allows you to do as to,
Sure.
but yeah, there's courses run at
And some of those
weekends and
are part-time, I think, James, as well,
yeah,
aren't they?
some of them are part-time, and I think some organizations might even run them off over maybe 9 months over a whole series of Saturdays.
Okay.
And you might have to go to an ag college to do there's a practical element as well. So, you have to be able to do certain tasks as part of the examination process.
Just another kind of scenario there, James. Let's just say that you have a family who talked about this maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and as you say, the discussion was had. People knew the road of travel. The farm wasn't transferred because the parents weren't ready to do that, but now they're kind of getting near that stage where they're ready to kind of pull that lever and kind of say the thing is going. But things might have changed in the meantime. You mentioned as we went along, budgets have changed, various different elements of it. Is there or how do people revisit that in terms of that whole planning scenario? Does the whole process need to start again, or can it just be slight adjustments along the way? Or have you seen that in practice?
I would say slight adjustments would probably take place. Like, I mean, in that 15 years, some of the children might have got married and maybe moved away and may have a change of plan, said, right, okay, you were giving me the farm, now I really don't want the farm because I'm away working, I'm in a big city, I have a big house, and I have children, so circumstances change.
Sure.
So it might need a full revisit in terms of, right, now we need to find a different successor. Or sometimes I've come across a few cases where, you know, the children will come home eventually, but they're away working and maybe they're settled into a routine and they're not ready now for another 10 years. And sometimes, the transfer takes place, the children don't farm it, maybe the parents continue to farm it, or it gets leased out to a third party for a number of years. So sometimes yeah, there
Interim
are
arrangements kind of thing.
changes, yeah,
Yeah.
and it might get delayed further. But the con the conversation needs to, you know, the position needs to be updated based on the new circumstances.
Yes. Yes. And things say lots of things change along the way.
Yeah.
Just in terms of maybe a few closing to kind of close up this part of the series because we will have one more episode to come. But just in terms of your element of it there, James, is there one or two kind of key pieces of advice that you've seen to be really successful to help people starting out this journey that you've seen has worked really well?
Yeah, I think the best element that we've seen recently, and we had a Walsh scholar complete a bit of research for us. It's something that we brought from a study trip we were on in Vermont over 10 years ago. So what we see as a very good way to resolve farm succession is to get everybody in the room. So you have your accountant, your solicitor, your Teagasc advisor, and all the family in the room. So therefore, if a family member has a question, the expertise is in the room to answer that question. Okay. Now, it can be expensive because your solicitor might be from Carrow Town, but your accountant might be in Portlaoise or Fermoy or somewhere else. And you need a location. So use the Teagasc advisor in the Teagasc office to get all these people together. And whatever the fee comes to, well, sure, at least there's a 50% grant aid to cover, having the conversation. So we put three families through this process as part of the Walsh Scholars research, and we had three successful outcomes. So that's one way of doing it. I suppose the thing is, you write the will as the backstop. You have the family conversation and come up with a plan. When you have the plan worked out, then you go and talk to the accountant about the tax implications. And if the tax is zero or very close to zero, well, then maybe that becomes your plan, and you go to the solicitor to do the transfers at a timeline based on what the accountant tells you.
Plenty of steps in that, James. But I think they're very logical in terms of how you're after illustrating them to us. And listen, that's been a fantastic. I know there's been a lot of information for people listening to the show, and obviously they can go back and listen again and again to that. James, thanks very much for all of your time and your expertise. You're a mind of knowledge in terms of all this end of it. And just the last one, James, along the line, Teagasc have put together, as you talked about, those number of bringing everyone together into the one room. Teagasc have been running various different, maybe more group sessions, if you like. You might describe those, or is there any of those coming up or planned for the future?
Yeah, so our Transfer in the Family Farm clinics, so we run them the first 2 weeks in October every year, and our first one was in 2014. And I think we could have 20,000 families put through those events in that length of time. They will continue on this year again in October. But we're also planning to run some seminars at local offices in the springtime. So keep an eye out, or maybe talk to your local advisor and say, listen, I'm interested in a seminar. Whenever there's a seminar coming up on Transfer in the Family Farm, and keep an eye on the Teagasc events page. And if you want to read more or watch some videos on Transfer in the Family Farm, or look at some of the booklets, if you are handy on Google and you put in Teagasc and succession into Google, those two words, the first link should come up as the Teagasc Farm succession page. So there's a load of information and videos there, and any events that we'll be having in the near future will be populated on that page.
James, you're a mind of information. Thanks very much. And to everyone listening, we're going to continue this series, and the next series along, we're going to chat a little bit about, James mentioned it already, around farm partnerships and succession planning, linked to those as well. James, thanks again for your time. I'll be talking to you again.
You're welcome.
Don't forget to tune in next week as we continue our discussion on farm succession, focused on transitional arrangements like farm partnerships, and how these can help to ensure a smooth transition on the farm. So finally, if you enjoyed the podcast, then please recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, don't forget to rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.